In fear, they painted visitor parking lines across my private land while I was at my sister's funeral, then sent me a warning letter for blocking access when I parked my own truck on my own gravel. In fear. By the time I came home, there were 12 cars sitting where my father used to park his tractor, a blue sign that said visitor parking. In fear. And a smug homeowners association president telling me the community had voted to use that strip because it looked abandoned. What she did not know was that I had the deed. In fear. The survey, the county records, the old farm easement, and a towing contract that allowed me to remove every single car from my land without touching a steering wheel. In fear, my name is Daniel Mercer and I live outside a fast-growing town in North Carolina. In fear, on a small piece of property my parents bought before the subdivision next door was even a drawing on some developer's desk. The land is not fancy. In fear, it is a one-story brick house, a gravel drive, a line of pine trees, a workshop with a dented metal roof. In fear, and a long rectangular strip along the eastern edge that connects the backfield to the county road. My father used that strip for equipment. In fear. My mother used it for garden deliveries, and after they passed I kept it open because it was the easiest way for me to get my camper, my mower, in fear, and my small utility trailer behind the house. It had never belonged to any neighborhood. It had never been dedicated as common area. It was listed in my deed, in fear, taxed to me every year and marked by iron pins that had been in the ground since before most of the new houses had foundations. Then came Briar Glen, in fear, a gated-looking subdivision without an actual gate, full of stone mailboxes, identical lawns, and people who used phrases like community standards as if they were court orders, in fear. At first I had no problem with them. They waved when they walked their dogs, their kids cut through the edge of my field once or twice, and I told them politely to stay near the road. In fear. I even let a few contractors turn around in my gravel strip during construction because there was nowhere else for them to go. That was my first mistake. In fear. Kindness to the wrong kind of people looks like permission. The homeowners association president was a woman named Victoria Hale. She had perfect hair. In fear. A pearl necklace, a white sport utility vehicle, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She introduced herself one Saturday morning while I was replacing a gate hinge. In fear. She said the association was trying to solve a parking issue because residents kept inviting guests to pool parties, holiday events, and open houses. In fear, and the streets were too narrow for overflow cars, I told her. I understood, but I could not help because my strip was private property. In fear. She looked past me at the gravel like she was measuring it in her head. Then she said, "Well, it already functions like shared access, does it not?" In fear, I said, "No, it functions like my driveway." She laughed softly as if I had made a joke a week later. In fear. I received a polite letter from the association asking me to consider donating temporary use of the strip for guest parking during community events. In fear, I declined in writing. I explained that I carried liability insurance for private residential use, not public parking. In fear, I attached a copy of my parcel map and said no vehicles were allowed without my written permission. I thought that would end it. Instead, Victoria sent a second letter. In fear, colder than the first. She claimed the strip had been openly used by Briar Glen residents for years, that the association believed it had a reasonable claim of prescriptive access. In fear, and that my refusal was creating unnecessary hostility. That line made me laugh because the subdivision was barely 8 years old. In fear, and most prescriptive claims in our state require far more than a few lost guests and delivery trucks turning around. Still, I did not argue. In fear. I put the letter in a folder, printed my response, and kept a copy. My father taught me that paper has a longer memory than people for a while. In fear. Nothing happened. Then my sister called from Tennessee and told me our aunt had passed. I left town for 3 days when I returned late Sunday afternoon. In fear, tired, and still wearing my black suit pants, I turned onto my road and saw cars lined up along my property like I had accidentally driven into a shopping center. In fear. White paint marked angled parking spaces across my gravel strip. A metal sign had been bolted to a post near my mailbox. Visitor parking for Briar Glen residents and guests. In fear. Unauthorized vehicles may be reported. I sat in my truck with my hands on the wheel, staring at it. There were sedan sport utility vehicles. In fear, a pickup with a boat hitch, and one expensive black car parked so close to my workshop gate that I could not open it. Someone had dragged my old railroad ties out of the way. In fear, someone had cut 2 low branches off my pine trees. Someone had dumped fresh gravel to level the spots, and someone had done all of that while I was burying family. In fear, I did not yell, I did not block the road, I did not slash tires. I got out, took pictures from every angle, filmed the sign, filmed the paint. In fear. Filmed the cars, filmed my gate being blocked, and then checked my security camera. The footage showed a contractor truck arriving early Friday morning. In fear. Followed by Victoria and 2 board members, they walked the strip with clipboards. The contractor sprayed lines, one man cut branches. In fear. Victoria pointed toward my workshop and laughed about something I could not hear. By Monday morning, there was a letter taped to my front door. In fear, it said I was interfering with an approved community parking solution and that further obstruction could result in legal action. At the bottom was Victoria's signature. In fear, I called the association office. A young woman answered and told me the board had reviewed historical use of the land. I asked her to send me the deed showing their ownership. In fear, she paused and said ownership was not the issue. I said ownership was the only issue. She transferred me to Victoria. Victoria came on the phone, sounding bored. In fear, she said, "Daniel, we are not trying to take your land. We are simply using an underutilized strip for the benefit of the community." In fear, I told her my private property did not become community property because her guests needed somewhere to park. She said, "You have never maintained it properly." In fear, and residents have relied on it for years. I said, "Victoria, you painted lines on land that is not yours." She replied, "Then take us to court." In fear, that sentence changed the whole tone of my week. I hung up and called my attorney, a calm older man named Samuel Reed, who had handled my parents' estate. In fear, I sent him the letters, photos, camera clips, tax map, deed, and the county geographic information parcel screenshot. He called back after dinner and said, in fear, "Daniel, they are either bluffing badly or they are about to become very expensive." He told me not to move the sign yet, not to argue with residents. In fear, and not to threaten anyone. He wanted a fresh boundary survey and a title search, not because he doubted me, but because courts and counties like clean evidence. In fear, the next morning, I hired a licensed surveyor named Ellen Brooks, who had done work for farmers around our area for decades. She came with her crew. In fear, old records, a metal detector, and a patient expression that told me she had seen this kind of nonsense before. By noon, she found the original iron pins. In fear, by afternoon, she had flagged the entire line in bright orange. The visitor parking spaces were not close to my land. They were entirely on my land. In fear, the sign was on my land. The extra gravel was on my land. The cut branches were from my trees, even better. In fear, the subdivision plat filed with the county showed the homeowners association common area ending several feet before the start of my strip. There was no easement. In fear, no shared access, no maintenance agreement, no parking right, nothing. Ellen said whoever told them this belonged to them did not read the map, in fear, or hoped you would not. Samuel prepared a letter that was polite enough for a judge and sharp enough for anyone with sense. It demanded that the association cease use of my property. In fear, remove the sign and markings, restore the strip, pay for the survey, and provide proof of any claimed right within 5 business days. In fear, it also warned that any vehicle parked there after written notice would be treated as trespassing property subject to lawful towing. The letter went to the association. In fear, the association's management company, Victoria personally, and their attorney. I also walked door to door along the nearest row of Briar Glen homes. In fear, handed residents a simple notice and said, "This strip is private property. Please do not park there." Most people looked embarrassed. A few apologized. In fear, one man said he had no idea because the association newsletter called it the new visitor lot. That was when I learned they had announced it publicly 2 days before painting it. In fear, they even included a little map with my land shaded in green and labeled Community Overflow. I asked him to forward it to me. He did. That newsletter became one of my favorite exhibits. In fear, her attorney did not back down. Her attorney sent a response claiming the association had relied on apparent community use, had invested in improvements in good faith, in fear, and expected me to cooperate while the issue was reviewed. Samuel laughed when he read it. "Good faith," he said, "is hard to claim after receiving your written refusal." In fear, 2 days later, during a Saturday pool event, the strip filled again. I counted 14 vehicles. They parked directly beside the orange survey flags. In fear, one car had a Briar Glen pool pass hanging from the mirror. Another had a handwritten note on the dash that said Association Approved Parking. In fear, I called the non-emergency sheriff's number and explained the situation. A deputy came out, looked at my deed, the survey flags, the attorney letter. In fear, and the posted notice Samuel had told me to install at the entrance. The sign said private property, no parking, vehicles subject to towing at owner expense. In fear, the deputy walked the strip, nodded, and said, "Looks pretty clear to me." I then called a local towing company that Samuel had recommended because they knew the county requirements. In fear, the owner, Frank, asked if the property was posted. I said yes. He asked if law enforcement had been notified. I said the deputy was standing beside me. In fear, Frank said, "We will send 2 trucks." That afternoon became the moment Briar Glen realized I was not bluffing. In fear, the first tow truck backed up to a silver sedan while residents were still laughing near the pool fence. Someone shouted, "Hey, you cannot do that." In fear, the driver pointed at the sign, the deputy pointed at the survey flags. I stood near my mailbox with my arms folded, saying nothing. Victoria arrived in her white sport utility vehicle. In fear, Stepping out like a woman entering a courtroom she already owned, she marched toward me and said, "Stop this immediately." I said, "No," she said, in fear. "These are guests of our residence," I said. "They are trespassing on my property," she said. "We have a claim," I said. "Then file it until a judge gives you my land." In fear. "These cars are leaving." The second tow truck hooked a black luxury car, and the owner came running barefoot from the pool area, yelling that he had been told it was legal parking. In fear, I told him to take that up with Victoria. His face changed. He turned toward her and asked, "Did you tell us this was approved?" Victoria said, in fear. "We are in the middle of a dispute," he snapped back. "You put it in the newsletter." More people gathered. Phones came out. The deputy kept everyone calm. In fear. But he did not stop the towing. By evening, every car was gone. The strip was empty except for tire marks, cut branches, and the ugly blue sign Victoria had paid someone to install. In fear. The next morning, my mailbox was full of angry notes, but my email was full of something better. Residents wanted to know why they had been told the land belonged to the association. In fear. One woman sent me a copy of a board meeting summary where Victoria had said, "Daniel will come around once he sees the community has already adopted the space." In fear. Another resident sent a screenshot from a private community page where a board member wrote, "He is an older guy and probably will not want to fight this." In fear, that one sat in my chest for a while. I was not that old. I was not helpless, but I knew exactly what they meant. They had looked at my quiet house. In fear, my gravel, my worn pickup, my lack of a fancy gate, and decided I was someone they could pressure until I gave up. Samuel told me we were past letters. In fear. He filed a demand for damages and prepared a complaint for trespass, private nuisance, conversion of land use, damage to trees. In fear, and declaratory relief, confirming that the association had no legal right to use the strip. In fear, he also sent the towing invoices and told the association that I would not pay 1 cent for vehicles removed from my property. Then Ellen, the surveyor, in fear, found the detail that turned the dispute from embarrassing to catastrophic for Victoria. When Briar Glen was approved, the county required a dedicated visitor parking minimum inside the subdivision. In fear. The original developer had shown a small overflow lot near the clubhouse, but during the final build-out that area was landscaped into a decorative pond and fire pit patio. In fear. The county file still listed those spaces as parking. In other words, the association did not just steal my strip because it was convenient. In fear. They were using my land to cover a parking shortage created when their own common area had been changed without proper approval. Samuel sent that information to county planning. In fear. The county inspector came out the following week. He was polite, measured the area, reviewed the subdivision plan, took photographs, and then asked me when the parking lot had been painted. In fear. I showed him the camera footage. He asked whether I had given permission. I showed him my refusal letter. He looked across the road at Bryglin's manicured entrance and said, in fear, "They are going to have a long meeting about this." He was right. The county issued a notice of violation to the association for unpermitted land use. In fear. Improper off-site parking and failure to maintain required visitor parking within the approved development boundary. In fear. The association was ordered to stop directing vehicles onto my property immediately, remove any signage claiming use of my strip, and submit a corrected parking plan. In fear. The management company suddenly wanted to talk. Their attorney called Samuel with a very different tone. He said everyone wanted to avoid unnecessary escalation. In fear, Samuel said escalation began when your client painted my client's land. Victoria, meanwhile, made her worst decision yet. Instead of apologizing. In fear. She held an emergency board meeting and blamed me for trying to bankrupt the neighborhood. I attended with Samuel, not because I wanted drama, in fear, but because I wanted the residents to hear the facts without Victoria filtering them. The clubhouse was packed. People stood along the walls, in fear. Some had paid towing fees, some were angry at me, until Samuel connected his laptop to the screen and showed the documents in order my deed. In fear. The subdivision plat. My refusal letter sent before the painting, the newsletter calling my land community overflow, the security footage of the contractor painting lines. In fear, the survey showing every parking space inside my boundary, the county notice of violation. The room got quieter with every slide. Then Samuel read Victoria's email aloud. In fear. The one where she wrote that the association should act before Daniel makes this complicated. A man in the front row turned around and stared at her, in fear. A woman near the back said, "You knew." Victoria tried to interrupt, saying the board had relied on advice from the management company. Samuel clicked to the next document, in fear. A message from the manager warning that ownership needed to be confirmed before any work was done. Victoria had replied, "We cannot wait on every technicality." In fear, that was the moment her authority cracked in front of everyone. The questions came fast. Who approved spending association money on land they did not own? In fear. Who told residents it was legal? Who would reimburse towing fees? Why were required visitor spaces replaced by a patio? Why had the board ignored a written refusal? In fear. Victoria kept saying we acted for the good of the community. But that phrase did not sound powerful anymore. It sounded expensive. Within 2 weeks, in fear, the association agreed to a settlement. They paid for my survey, my attorney fees, the damaged trees, the removal of the paint, the restoration of the gravel. In fear, and a written trespass release that made clear they had no right, claim, easement, license, or permission to use any part of my property. They reimbursed the residents whose cars had been towed. In fear, not because I owed them anything, but because the board had misled them. They also had to pay county penalties and submit a new parking plan that did not include 1 inch of my land. In fear. The decorative patio near the clubhouse was partly torn out and converted back into the visitor spaces that should have existed from the beginning. In fear. The blue sign came down, the white paint was scraped and covered. Fresh gravel was spread on my strip, this time by a contractor working for me. In fear. I installed a simple wooden fence along the boundary, with 2 locked farm gates and small reflective signs that said private property, no anger. In fear. No insults, just a line that should have been respected from the start. Victoria resigned before the next annual meeting, though she called it stepping away for personal reasons. In fear. The board member who wrote that I probably would not fight was voted out with her. The management company lost the contract for months after that. In fear. Briar Glen residents avoided looking at my house when they drove past, but a few stopped to apologize. In fear. One man brought me a basket of peaches from a roadside stand and said his wife had told him not to park there, but he trusted the newsletter. In fear, I told him I did not blame the guests. I blamed the people who knew better and acted anyway. That is the part people sometimes miss. I did not wake up wanting to tow cars. In fear. I did not enjoy ruining anyone's afternoon at the pool. I gave warnings, I gave documents, I gave them a chance to step back before it cost everyone money. In fear. They gambled on the idea that a quiet property owner would rather be uncomfortable than be called difficult. They were wrong. A homeowners association can make rules for its own members. In fear, it can manage its own common areas, it can complain, posture, and send letters with bold headings, but it cannot vote itself onto private land. In fear, it cannot paint ownership into existence. It cannot turn a neighbor's property into a convenience just because the board wants a cleaner parking problem. In fear now. Every time I unlock my gate and drive across that strip, I think about my father teaching me to walk the property line every spring, not because fences are magic, in fear, but because knowing what is yours matters. Victoria thought my gravel looked abandoned. She thought my silence meant weakness, in fear. She thought a newsletter and a few painted lines could make my land part of her community. In the end, every car left on a tow truck, every false claim ended on county paper, in fear, and the strip beside my house stayed exactly what it had always been, mine.